All right, welcome back to another new episode of the Sports Lounge here on WFRV Plus. I'm your host, Adam Ingles, and with me is Sean Kornuski. Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Happy New Year. I know we didn't get a chance to kind of talk about that. New Year,
No.
any resolutions that you're holding to this year?
No, I usually fail in that category. So I
Same
don't know,
here.
probably just get in better shape. But
resolution.
maybe with our guest, I can get into the gym and do that a little
For
bit
sure,
more.
let's get into it. So our guest today is former UWGB athlete and owner of the Driveway in Hobart and Wausau. It's Wisconsin's premier basketball training facility. He has trained thousands of athletes using an old school work ethic and new school technology, helping players of all ages get better on and off the court. He's turned his playing background into a true hub for hoops and community, and he joins us on the Sports Lounge. Please welcome Ryan Borowicz to the show. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks guys.
Thanks for
Appreciate
joining us. Any resolutions for you in this new year?
Yeah, I just being at peace. I think taking time every day. I've got a weird schedule with what I do for a living, so I have time during the days. Afternoon, and evenings are my busy time, and that's kind of when things ramp up. So taking time in the mornings, a purposeful time to be just at peace, and making sure that kind of permeates the rest of my day is kind of what I'm going for.
It's a great reset into.
We're talking
the new
like
year.
aromatherapy or what are we?
Not too much of that, but really just more being thankful, and that I feel like I am, but when I find when I'm personally, like when I'm verbally saying it in my mind, I'm just by myself, and we have a little cabin room, we call it, in our basement. It's just basically a closet, but I kind of act like I'm up north,
Right?
Yeah.
And but just being thankful and just listing the things that I'm thankful for, because I can go on and on and on. I'm very blessed, and when you do that, all the stress kind of just goes away. So
For sure.
doing that consistently every day.
Amen. Well, hey, that's a great thing that you've brought to the community, and we're going to talk a lot more about that, about how others are thankful for this resource that you have in Hobart and Wausau.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
Yeah.
So for people who aren't familiar, talk about the concept of the Driveway, how it started, how long you've been around, and kind of the philosophy behind why you started it.
So I think it was 2016 when we opened. So about 2014, I started having this idea. And I had been working with kids since 2005, basically, one-on-one sessions. I would go to kids' houses and work with them in their driveway, their backyard, a gym that we could find, anything like that. And then I started doing some clinics, and it was kind of a side hustle. And then about late 2014, 2015, I started to, get the idea, like, could I have a space? We didn't have any money, so it wasn't like I could, I'm going to do this. And I didn't really want to ask a bunch of friends for, investors kind of thing, because then the vision changes very quickly. And I had a pretty clear vision of what I wanted. So then, I was working full time at a church as a sports director. So I was doing some basketball instruction, but that was part of the program at the church. And then, both jobs were getting busier. The side hustle was becoming a full time hustle. As well as my normal job. And I loved what I was doing. So it was really hard. It's one thing I've had jobs in the past where I jumped ship because it just wasn't a good fit. And I was ready to leave.
Right.
I loved my job at the church. I worked there for 10 years at Appleton Alliance Church, and great people, great mission, great vision, everything there. But it really prepared me to do the Driveway, because I kind of was able to run things myself and kind of start it from scratch, the program there. So then, put together just a one sheet paper, kind of a vision statement of what I wanted to do and what I wanted it to look like and feel like. And I think that was really important, because then it became a real thing. And then I just started asking a lot of questions. I didn't know anything about owning a business, starting a business, building a 10,000 square foot building. I knew a lot about basketball. I didn't know how to build the basketball.
Right.
So I just became a beginner and was okay with asking questions. I became okay with being told no by banks and people that said, "You're crazy, Ryan. This is a dumb idea. Why would you do this?" But it was one of those visions that was, I was turning 40 at the time, and I was like, if I don't do this in 10 years, will I regret it? And the answer was always yes. You will regret it if you don't do it. And that became the driving force. And then so we broke ground in 2015 and opened in 2016. So I didn't know exactly how it was going to go. It was very risky. But at the time, I kind of knew what summer would look like. I'd been running summer camps. I kind of knew, we had a lot of kids coming through our camps at the church there that weren't from the church. They were just community Appleton and Green Bay area people. I felt like if I could do that, at least we could pay the bills.
Right.
I didn't really know what the school year was going to look like day to day. I had a plan, but there wasn't anything like this, so I didn't know. I went around the country, I visited a few places, but they were a little bit different. But I always took something out of those places, and then stuck with the vision of wanting to make an impact. And I think personally, that's what I want to do is make an impact on people's lives, and I just get to do it using basketball.
Right.
Let's go back to the roots. We'll go back before 2025 or 2005, I should say. Go back to your UWGB days and playing days. The experience that you had, and how does it shape yourself in order to deliver that experience to the kids that you work with?
Well, I think as a player, I wasn't anything special athletically. You look at that level, and there's some freaks. There's some freak athletes at that level and I was not that. So I had to develop something that allowed me to get on the court. For me, it was shooting. But yet, you can't just be a good shooter at that level. You got to be able to guard somebody. You can't guard, you're not playing, period. You got to be able to handle it. You got to be able to pass it. You got to be able to play your role, especially in the system that we had back then. You had a very specific role. It wasn't, I'm going to do everything. It was, you do your job.
Right.
And so as a player growing up, I probably realized that about 7th, 8th grade. Okay, I'm not going to be 6'8". I'm not going to jump out of the gym. I better do something really well and maybe better than anybody else. So developing that work ethic of putting in the time and the repetitions and when people wanted to go home and I wanted to stay in the gym, all of that kind of developed me into a player. And then I took that, in my personal one-on-one work with kids before the driveway, it was that kind of that intimate part of the game, the individual part. I love the X's and O's and the 5-on-5, but as a high school coach, a youth coach, even college coach, they don't have the time to work on that. They have 500 things to get done in an hour and a half practice. So I've always loved that one-on-one part of the game and the details and the film study and all that kind of thing. So then that kind of became my niche, the teaching aspect of that. How do I individually get better so that I can help my team? Because that's who I was as a player.
Right.
So it's kind of developed from that.
You were around in the Dick Bennett era. So my question is, how much did you take out of, like, say, getting coached by Coach Bennett to what you apply today?
Well, I had Coach Bennett my first year, so he recruited me, and then my first year was his last year at Green Bay.
Okay.
And then played for Mike Heidemann for 4 more years. And Mike was very similar to Dick. And they, really it's what sports teaches you beyond the skill. So I learned more about being a man probably from those guys than I did about shooting a jump shot. And that was important because that's what you take out of sports, and because you don't play forever, and that's one thing I tell kids all the time. And, I don't know when I'm working with a 5th grader or an 8th grader, I don't know if they're even going to play varsity basketball. And I don't look at, if they don't play varsity basketball, I don't look at it was a failure on our part. Because some kids, it's just not in the cards. But if we can help them as individuals and understand work ethic and these kids that come into the driveway and shoot every day, that becomes a habit. It just becomes who you are. Because someday you're going to have to show up for work and you don't want to, but you show up for work anyway, just like you showed up to shoot. So I look at, and it has to be about bigger than how many points do they score and what's their shooting percentage and all that. Because they're going to stop playing at some point, and we still want to know that we had an impact on them that way.
Right. I mean, I kind of compare what you're saying to, we had Rudiger in the studio, and we asked him what he saw himself doing past playing for GB next year, and he really wants to get that coaching role. And I think that's what he enjoys the most is from what we took from him is just that leadership skill. So I think that's big. We're going to go to a quick break, our first break here. And when we come back, we'll have more with Coach Ryan Borowicz. I need a mirror or something like that because I cannot see that screen. So when we come back, we are back to the Sports Lounge, and we have got our guest Ryan Borowicz here. Ryan, we're going to talk a little bit about the player development, and the results that you have seen over the years that you've been with the driveway. I just have my son in there over the holidays, and I'm listening to you. You've worked with more than 30,000 sports figures. Is that correct?
I mean, we tried to come up with a number, and I try not to get hung up on that and who and this and that, but you do this for long enough, and with large groups.
But who keeps count? But you're in clusters.
We don't keep track, and that's why, But it's been a significant amount, and really a great opportunity for me to use the gifts that God gave me and the experiences that I've had to then make an impact on kids.
Yeah, what kind of growth do you love seeing the most out of these kids that you're coaching?
I think and I maybe even mentioned it when you were there. When I see kids take their own development and make it theirs versus their parents, because in the younger ages, and my kids have gone through this too. The parents sign you up. The parents drive you there. The parents, it's their. It might be their thing. Maybe they never had their day, and they're trying to live their day through their kid. Then you get some parents who are just hands off, but they're still organizing their kids' lives, their sports lives, and that's normal. We all do that. But at some point, you see this kind of switch get flipped in kids where it becomes their thing and they want to get better, and it's their development and not the parent. I think that's kind of I love seeing that moment, and it's different for everybody. It might be a young kid, it might be a high school kid, it might be in college, but it's usually there. And when it becomes theirs, then you can really challenge kids and push them, because when it's not, it's the parents' thing and the kids are just annoyed. Yeah. They're maybe there, they kind of like basketball or whatever, but it's not their thing. So I look for that moment, and when now we can go.
The thing that I really took out of it and just watching for the 2.5 hours of this was that you were really trying to embed the kids with, like, take ownership. This is your life. If something's not working, then try something different. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you told the kids?
Well, I think, I think the phrase I said was do something about it, and a lot of that is just my own experience. You're not good at something, do something about it. It's easy to complain. It's easy to quit. It's easy to move on to something else versus saying, if it matters to you, do something about it. And, in this community, we have a lot of resources. When I was a kid, part of the reason for the driveway, when I was a kid, I would ride my bike to the YMCA. And I wouldn't let my kids ride their bike that far nowadays.
No.
Which I hate to say, but we
it's a different world,
right?
True.
And but I would ride to the YMCA, and it was a small one over kind of right by Southwest. There used to be a YMCA there, and you didn't know what you're going to get. You might get the open gym. You might get a bunch of old dudes playing ball, and you're going to get nothing. I used to shoot when that would happen. I'd show up, and there's a bunch of old dudes playing shirts and skins, right? And I don't know nothing. I'm 10, and there was a pull-up bar on the side, and I would shoot on the pull-up bar. So there's a bunch of guys. You can't shoot. Do something about it. Shoot on the pull-up bar. And I learned how to have arc because I shot the ball over the pull-up bar. And so, there's always going to be something in your way. I just said this to a kid the other day. Anything good is on the other side of hard. And it's one of my favorite sayings I heard, years ago. And I say it a lot because if you want to be good, especially if you're not athletically just gifted, it's going to be on the other side of hard, and you're going to have to take that step. So do something about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned going to the Y and shooting in the pull-up bar, but obviously technology has advanced. So, what tools are you using that you may not have had when we were kids practicing at the Y that are a lot more beneficial to kids nowadays?
Well, one thing we've just tried to do as a business, as a facility, is make it about the kids. A lot of gyms you go in and there's a bunch of adults playing 5-on-5 and the kids can't get on the court. And that was frustrating for me when I was a kid. So we don't do adult leagues. We don't let open gym get taken over by a bunch of older people. We want kids in there with their parents, especially in the gym. So if you come to one of our open gyms, you're going to see a dad rebounding for a kid. You're going to see a mom playing one-on-one against her daughter, and not a bunch of guys running up and down with kids sitting there like, when is it our turn? So that's a intentional thing that we've tried to do in the gym. From a technology standpoint, we one of the development things for me that's big is just repetition and learning how to do it right, but then repping it out as a shooter. Shooting is never going to not be important in basketball. Because of the advent of Steph Curry, it became really important. When you look at the shot charts and the way the game has evolved, you got to be able to shoot it. So we added these 10 shooting cages, and it was a concept that I had seen around the country and talked to people and kind of got their blessing to do it on my own without their franchise kind of thing. And the concept is simply, it's like a batting cage, and what do hitters do when they want to get better? They put the ball in the tee, and they do soft toss and they get in the cage. What do golfers do when they want to improve? They don't go play 18. They go to the range, and they spend way more time on the range than they do playing 18. So the concept with the shooting cages was, let's make it as efficient as possible. So these shooting machines, we use the gun by Shoot Away. I can shoot 500 shots in 27 minutes. They don't get 500 shots in a youth practice over the course of a month. So you're going to get the repetitions there. And then it also becomes that thing where, is it kind of boring to shoot 500 shots? Yeah, it might be. But you do it anyway, because there's going to be parts of your job when you're 35 that are kind of boring, but you do it anyway because you have to, So I love that tie-in of how does this translate to life? I see it with my own son. I know my oldest son is a freshman at Eau Claire, and he wants to be a surgeon, and he's going to go to medical school. So like, he's showing up for the freshman classes knowing that's the goal long term, just like he showed up to work in our shooting cages and like constantly and every day. It's just what he did. So now it translates into, 12 years from now, I want to be a surgeon. I've got to study for this test now and just put in the time. So I see that translation a lot, and that's really exciting for me. So we use those guns. The kids like to see their numbers. It keeps track of their percentage, all that kind of thing. We do a lot of video analysis. I personally love to do video analysis and help kids see, this is an impediment to your shot. Let's work on fixing it, and then if it's theirs, they'll embrace it. And then just there's so much more video aspect in general. We do a lot at one of our trainers, Ty Ketz, does a great job of breaking down film with kids, so that when he is doing a one-on-one session with a kid, the context isn't just a random, hey, let's work on this. It's, let's look at your game from last night. You had 3 of these opportunities. What could you have done differently? Okay, let's work on that. And then he'll put himself in the defender's position. And now that kid has to do that move on him that would have made more sense last night. So, a lot of video analysis is a big part for us.
When I think back kind of when I was younger, the profile of a Northeast Wisconsin basketball player was a sharpshooter, like yourself at Ashwaubenon. But we're seeing, kids like, Omari Allen come out of the area, just this crazy athleticism. So how are you trying to blend that athleticism that is kind of required for today's game with the shooting?
Well, I think what we've tried to do is stick to who we are. We don't do the sports performance, the physical aspect. We have friends at Synergy Sports right next door. Scotty Smith that owns that is a good friend of mine. So, we refer people there. So we see kids walking back and forth literally, almost every day. And we certainly refer to people that are specialized in doing, that, whether it's at their school or it's a private organization. But then helping kids understand, for me, a big part of it is we can work on your shot all day. But sometimes the right thing to do in the game isn't to take that shot. Even though we've been working on your shot, the right thing to do there is pass the ball. So, or to drive. And then, if you can only shoot, but you can't drive and you can't get to the basket, you might have to work on your body a little bit. You might have to get some strength. You might have to, so we can kind of identify that and say, yes, you're a knockdown shooter now, or you're really good at this. But the game is multifaceted. There's other things you have to be able to do, especially if you're talking to kids that want to play in college someday and realize that goal. Helping kids see that college coaches aren't always looking for the kid who scored the most points. They've got a bunch of kids on their team that were the best player on their high school team. And what role can you fill? How does your how does your body maybe affect you? Got to be a rebounder. You know, what if you get 5 offensive rebounds a game and kick it out to that kid who scored 2,000 points in high school, who's a better shooter than you? So does your body need to improve to do that? You know, does your mind need to improve and be able to read? Okay, let's watch a bunch of film and take a look at a shot. What's the pause it. What's the trajectory of that shot? Where did it come from? 70% of shots from the 3-point line come off the weak side. Where can you go offensively to get that rebound? You know, helping kids understand that part of the game is really fun.
Sure. So just to understand, you know, the strategy in it as well, you know, not just the kind of the fundamentals of shooting. That sounds like, you know, a great thing to teach the kids for sure.
And to be honest, kids nowadays, I'm sorry to say, but their stamina sucks. So mentally training them to keep their composure and follow suit when it comes to making those plays. That's what's really important to
I would imagine that for kids nowadays and kind of social media, they want that instant gratification.
For sure.
So it's nice to hear that, you know, that repetition, that like everything's not going to come right away, right? You got to understand that there's a process to things.
And you might, you know, especially in shooting, like Steph Curry has over 10 nights. He's the best shooter we've ever seen, and I don't even think it's close. You know, I was just texting back and forth today with a girl that I've worked with for a long time. Great shooter, one of the best players in Wisconsin last year. And, you know, she's just having a little bit of a slump.
Yeah.
Okay, let's work through that. You know, just like in life, you're going to have a little slump sometimes, you know.
Sure.
So I just think it's really cool to use sports to teach life.
Absolutely.
We're going to cut to a quick break here, and then we'll finish up with Ryan Borowicz when we come back.
All right, welcome back to our last segment here on the Sports Lounge. We're here with Ryan Borowicz, owner of The Driveway. Ryan, kind of a philosophical question for you. You know, I know you were a multi-sport athlete. Your sons are multi-sport athletes. But we're seeing kind of an increase in specialization in certain sports. So just want to kind of understand your you know, viewpoint on the balance of, you know, maybe focusing on a sport or playing multiple sports.
So there's definitely different thoughts on it, and I get it. You know, I think that's probably the first thing I would say for a kid who's, you know, well into high school, who really wants to focus on one. I get it. I think there's benefit in doing other things, and I'll use my son as an example. I have a son who's a junior right now and just played on West Appear's state championship team, and right into basketball. But the biggest thing about him is he's just a competitor, and he just wants to compete in whatever he's doing, and it shows. And I think the other thing that as a player, I played baseball. I wasn't even any good at baseball, basketball, football. I really cared about basketball and football. Baseball was just kind of fun, and I improved as I got older, but I certainly wasn't a standout like in basketball and football. But the mental break that you get when you play a different sport is huge. You know, I was so intense in basketball and football. Baseball, I'm chewing sunflower seeds. I'm just standing around for half the time. Like, it is such a different sport, and it mentally gives you that break. And I think that's really important. Not only the physical. I mean, there's more people with more expertise than I can say about the physical aspect of playing multiple sports, but the mental side to me is really important. So I always encourage you, even though I run a basketball facility, you will never hear me tell a kid, hey, you should just focus on basketball. Never.
Right. Yeah. No, and I agree with you. I think it does take a lot. My son plays 3 sports. He's a baseball, basketball, football. So he takes no breaks whatsoever. But I told him, you know, you got to concentrate on 1 or 2 sports because
Dad's going crazy driving you around.
Dad's not going to be able to coach every single sport that you go with, you know. So let's talk a little bit about community and how the Driveway has become, you know, the hub of, you know, serious basketball players in the area. But how important is it for you to, you know, build something locally in the area and really branch out with other businesses?
Well, I think it's really cool because, you know, we do birthday party. We probably average about 4 birthday parties a weekend. So we get non-basketball players in there. You see a bunch of kids running in with baseball caps on. Oh, we got a baseball party. You know, you'll see hockey players in there. And so we do partner with organizations. We allow it to be rented. So one of my things, part of that vision statement, you know, 11 years ago, was about being a basketball resource for the community. So we do a coaches clinic. We want to help youth coaches, especially. So we're not just come in and we're going to work you out and make you sweat. You know, there's a lot of people can do that. To me, it's a bigger picture kind of thing. And then the relationships that develop. I mean, I'm friends. I go and do a lot of shooting clinics around the state. These coaches have become good friends of mine now. We text on a daily basis, that just because I've been there so often, and they, you know, it's just kind of a cool way to bridge gaps that maybe geographically aren't there, but now, you know these people and you talk to them, and you've become a resource to them, so you have value to them.
What does that mean to you to have some former players that come back? We had a girl from Madison that came in to coach when my son was there. You know, like, so what does that mean to you to have those people come back?
Well, it's, we've been around long enough that we can kind of see that, so some of these kids that are in college are kids that I worked with in 3rd, 4th grade. Rainey Wilson is a great example. I probably spent the most amount of time over the years with Rainey. She played at Hortonville last year and is now at Maryland. And Rainey was a daily fixture at the driveway. And we just, I became good friends with her family and her dad, and Rainey just, she texted me this morning about something. So it's really cool because now it comes full circle. And then in our summer camps, we have a lot of college kids. One thing I want to do is put role models in front of these younger kids. So we have kids that play in college that most of them are kids that we worked with over the years. And now we can put them in front of younger kids as role models. So it's kind of, at that point in the stage of the business where we can kind of cycle them all the way through, which is really cool.
All right, last question for you before we go. So you've been doing this over a decade now at the driveway. What does the next decade look like for the driveway?
Boy, number one is just keep making an impact. I don't know what that will look like. We've added a facility in Wausau. I'd love to have 3 or 4, around the state. I don't have visions of, 50 in the country. But I'd like to keep making an impact in the state of Wisconsin, where I'm from, and this is where we're going to live. So that vision is definitely still out there. But you need people to do that. You need that vision. You need processes, all that kind of thing. So I could see, hopefully, that continue. But I'm also day to day, still on the court and really trying to make an impact on kids every day.
Right. Well, if anybody wants to check out the driveway, you want to plug website, socials, phone number.
The main thing is drivewayhoops.com. And you're going to find everything on there. Socials, just look for the driveway. You'll see us on Instagram and Facebook a lot. Our summer camp registration is coming up in 2 weeks, and that's a big deal. We have a lot of people, and it's kind of a concert ticket kind of thing where you got to get in pretty quick because a lot of them fill up within minutes. So that's a big deal. So drivewayhoops.com, they'll find everything.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for our times. For Sean Kornuski, I'm Adam Ingles. Thanks to Coach Ryan Borowicz for joining us.
Thanks,
That's
guys.
the Sports Lounge, and we'll see you next time on WFRV Plus.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool.